Kori te manu, takiri mai te ata. Ka awa te tihei mauri ora. Tēnā tātou katoa, kia mihi te hunga wairua o tātou mate huhua, haere whakungaro atu rā ki te pō. Tātou te ao ora, tēnā anō hoki tātou katoa. Kei ngā maunga whakahi, kei ngā maunga mā tā waka huri noa, nau mai rā, haramai ki runga i te kaupapa, kei mua i te aroha. Kia kōtai tātou, ā whakaaro, ā hia, ā moi ā, nā reira, tēnā koutou, kia ora hui mai rā tātou katoa. Kia ino i tātou. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mākina kina ki uta, kia mātaratara ki tai, e hi ake ana te ātākura. He tio, he huka, he hauhu, tihei, mauri ora.
Kia ora.
Morena koutou, ko Wayland taku ingoa. Thank you for joining this webinar to talk about the COVID-19 protection framework and here in the community model. Today we've got two guest speakers, so Dr. Claire Ahmad, Chief Executive for Social Service Providers Aotearoa, and Serena Curtis, our General Manager, Pacific and Community Capability at Ministry of Social Development. What we hope that you will gain from this is an understanding of the traffic light system. What does the care in the community model actually mean for you? So our loose agenda for the day is very shortly, we'll launch into our first speaker. I know we've only got an hour's worth of time, so we'll launch straight into our speakers. They'll go consecutively, one after the other. I'll introduce Serena after Claire. And then what we'll do is we'll then go into breakout rooms. We have got our relationship managers who will be supporting each of you in your regions into different breakout rooms. And you'll have a chance to kōrero and provide some feedback. That'll last for about 15 minutes, and then we'll bring you back out for some question and answers at the end of this end of our time together. Just a bit of housekeeping. We've got a bit of a technical wizard in the background. They've hopefully muted and turned off all of your cameras and microphones, but if they haven't, can you do that now, please? Just because we want to make sure that there's less sound interruption during this, during the webinar, during the presentations. And the chat function is enabled, so I encourage you through the guest speakers to throw some questions into that chat. And what we'll do at the end is we'll have a Q&A session, and we'll use that session to answer some of those questions. However, after this webinar, there'll be an e-update sent out with responses to the questions that couldn't get answered today as well. And of course, for those who are unable to attend today, a recording will be made available. So without further ado, I'd like to invite our first speaker, Dr. Claire Ahmad, the Chief Executive of Social Service Providers Aotearoa, to talk about the COVID-19 protection framework. Tēnā koe, Claire.
Tēnā koe, Waylon, and thanks for the introduction. Tēnā tātou katoa, nā mihi nui, nā mihi mahana kia koutou I hui nei tēnei ata. Warm greetings to everyone who is joining our call this morning. It's great to see a strong turnout. It's a really important kaupapa that we're having a kōrero about this morning. So this is really intended as a time for you to just be immersed, I guess, in this kaupapa and really to bring forward any pātai and whakaaro that you have around what this new COVID protection framework and the care in the community model means for us as social service providers. And I also want to acknowledge that there are quite a few of our MSD colleagues on the call who are going to be able to answer some of your pātai this morning. Just a quick background to me, as Waylon said, I'm Claire Ahmad, Chief Executive of Social Service Providers Aotearoa. We're a national peak body for community-based social services with over 200 organisational members around the motu. I know that many of you are on the call this morning and just we are here to tautoko you during what are very challenging times. So I'm just going to share my screen. I've got a few slides to take us through this morning, so please just bear with me while I get those up and running. All right, we're good to go. So really this morning is about working alongside children, rangatahi and whānau under the COVID-19 protection framework. It really is aimed at our social service providers this morning, and as I said, a chance to bring forward your pātai and whakaaro. Before I go any further, I really want to just acknowledge that it has been a really challenging couple of years, and especially for those providers and kaimahi up in Tamaki Makaurau, in Waikato and in Northland. We know that it has been a really difficult time. And I think as we move into the summer period and also looking towards 2022, I just want to acknowledge that we're all feeling different things right now. So on this image, if you're unable to see it, it's an image of a roller coaster, and it says it's all right to be riding the emotional roller coaster right now. You might feel kapai, relieved, grateful, hoha, worried, or overwhelmed, or many other things. And I just want to start our kōrero this morning by acknowledging that. I also want to say, ka nui te mihi kia koutou katoa. For those of you on the call this morning who are community-based social service providers, I want to acknowledge you are doing the incredible mahi right now through this pandemic, and I really know that it's challenging. The circumstances are challenging and there is ongoing uncertainty, but I want to say thank you for the work that you are doing. It makes a huge difference every day for all our hapori around the motu. So change is really our way of life at the moment. And I think, as I mentioned, uncertainty and change is going to continue as we move into 2022. So the introduction of the COVID protection framework, the CPF, as I'll refer to it this morning, has created changes for the way that social service providers work. So it's really important that we understand what the complexities of the CPF are and what they mean in practice. And so really that is what today is all about, as well as hearing from Serena about the care in the community model, which is a broader part of this CPF. So in terms of our mahi as social service providers and in relation to the CPF, you're probably aware that specific guidance has been put together and published for social service providers in relation to the CPF. And that's what my kōrero is going to focus on today. It's called the COVID Protection Framework Guidance for Social Service Providers, and it has been published by the Ministry of Social Development. So tuatahi, I thought I'll just quickly run us through where you can actually find this guidance, because I have to say for me, it wasn't so easy to find it initially. So I'll just take you through quickly. Hopefully most of you have already found it, but a quick reminder for those who may be wondering where it's located. So if you navigate to the homepage of MSD, you'll see on the left-hand side, there's a menu about us and our work. Click on the heading that says COVID-19. You'll see the pink arrow that I've got pointing to it there. Once you're through to that page, you'll find a link that says Guidance for Social Service Providers. Click on that one. That'll take you through to this page, which is the COVID-19 Protection Framework Guidance for Social Service Providers. And then you can click on Download the full guidance for providers. I've included a link here because I know we'll be sharing the slides out later. So just delving into the traffic light system, which is, I guess, the other name for the CPF. So to take a step back in terms of how this relates to our work as social service providers, really the traffic light system is intended to do three, I guess, broad high-level things. First of all, to allow social service providers to remain open and operate in ways as close as normal for vaccinated people, whilst minimizing the transmission of COVID-19. Secondly, to help keep vulnerable people and those who can't be vaccinated right now safe when they are engaging with social services. And thirdly, to empower social service providers to take responsibility for minimizing the spread of COVID-19. We really need to continue in this team of 5 million approach as we start to have more COVID circulating in our communities over the coming months. So then, key points to remember for us as social service providers in relation to the CPF. Tuatahi, social services can operate at all of the traffic light settings, red, yellow, and green. Tuarua, Some requirements stay the same at different traffic light settings, while others do change. So there is some complexity built into the traffic light system. So I really just want to reassure everyone that if you have been finding it a little bit confusing at times, you're not alone. And that's really why we decided to host this webinar today. And then thirdly, it's really important to remember that when we read the guidance for social service providers, we are always reading that together with the general COVID protection framework guidance. And you can find that on the covid19.gov.nz website. I've included a link there for you. But just to quickly remind everyone what you can find on that website. So first of all, you can find the overarching COVID-19 protection framework, the traffic light system, on one page. That's a really helpful one. Suggests that if you haven't already, probably a good idea to print that out and have it handy. Then you can also find a more of a deep dive into what each level of the traffic light system means at that broader level. So this is the general guidance for everyone. So this is, for example, what life at the red setting means. And you can see it goes into more detail there about the various things that we need to be thinking about. You can also find this handy little guide, which just gives it, again, a different overview of the protection framework, which I think is quite helpful. And then if we turn now to the guidance for social service providers, so this is where I'll spend the rest of my time this morning focusing on. So first of all, I really want to highlight three things about the social service provider guidance under the CPF. So the three things that I'm going to take us through are vaccine passes or COVID vaccine certificates, staff vaccination, and then critical wellbeing services and some of the nuances around what the COVID protection framework means for you if you are a critical wellbeing service. So first of all, in terms of vaccine passes or CVCs, as you might heard them referred to, COVID vaccine certificates. Two key things I want to highlight here. First of all, there are variable factors as to when and how you might use vaccine passes as a social service provider. So these are what traffic light level we are at in your particular region of the motu. Secondly, what type of service you are providing. And thirdly, what type of premises you're operating out of. The second key thing to remember in relation to vaccine passes and their use under the CPF as a social service provider is that if you are requiring a vaccine pass for access to the service, so for people in the community to access your service, then your staff also need to be vaccinated. So turning then to staff vaccination. If your service isn't using vaccine passes, then there is some level of choice about whether or not your staff need to be vaccinated. The choice that you make is going to impact on whether you can operate under the various different traffic lights, in particular in relation to orange and red. What you're encouraged to do is to use the assessment tool for decision making about staff vaccination. And you can find this on the WorkSafe website. It's called How to Decide What Work Requires a Vaccinated Employee. I've included a link there again, but I do want everyone to be aware that this guidance is in the process of sort of being iterated and updated. And I understand that it will be updated in the next week or so. So please keep checking back on that WorkSafe website to make sure that you are using the most up-to-date assessment framework for us. And then lastly, in relation to staff vaccination, given the multidisciplinary nature of social services, I'm very aware that already some of your staff will be covered by vaccine mandates. For example, this is particularly the case when we've got social service providers who, as part of their service, are providing services in the education space or in the health-related space. So it may be that you're doing a different risk assessment in relation to some of your staff, but some of your other staff may already be covered by a mandate. And I know that many of our social service providers have been navigating through that landscape over the last few weeks. And I know that it has been challenging, and I just really want to again mihi to you all for the work that you've been doing to navigate through these changes, because it is very much a changing landscape for us all operating in this space. Before I go to my next slide, just want to encourage everyone again, if you've got pātai or whakaaro that you want to share this morning, please do pop them into the chat function. Also, you will have seen when you registered for this webinar that there's an email address at MSD. You're welcome to send through pātai or whakaaro anytime around this kaupapa. So really encourage you to do that. So then continuing to take a closer look at the guidance in relation now to critical wellbeing services. So this is the third aspect of this CPF guidance for social service providers that I want to focus on this morning. So social services delivering critical wellbeing services are legally referred to as specified social services in the health order. These are services that are provided under the Oranga Tamariki Act, and services that are supporting people to maintain critical well-being and as crisis support for people who are unsafe or who are homeless. And these critical wellbeing services, I guess previously under the alert level system, we were referring to them as essential services. These can open under all traffic light levels. At all light levels, if you are operating as a critical wellbeing service, you are required to have systems and processes in place to ensure, as far as reasonably is practicable, that first of all, each relevant person who enters your workplace scans the QR code for the workplace or for the service, or that every person provides a contact record in accordance with your workplace's alternative contact record systems and processes. So for example, that's for someone who might not have their COVID vaccine certificate on their phone, for example, but has it in a paper form. You still need to be recording that they are entering your workplace or your premises. Of course, this is what ultimately is going to help us when we need to move to contact tracing or letting people know that they may have been in a location of interest. So then just dropping down a little further into vaccine passes and critical wellbeing services. So vaccine passes for critical wellbeing services, as I've already alluded to on the previous slide, are optional unless your service is listed as a non-vaccination pass service that cannot require vaccine passes for clients. So this is where it starts to get a little bit complex. So just a bit of decision making that has to be worked through. As an organisation, this is where you need to go through a decision-making process about vaccine passes, considering various key factors. And in the guidance for social services, these are mentioned as, for example, your capability and capacity to provide services to unvaccinated people, your ability to operate different models concurrently. So for example, in-person services and maybe alongside that online or phone services. Secondly, your ability for unvaccinated people to access the service, the ability for them to access the service elsewhere in their area. Is there an alternative place that they're going to be able to access the same service? And then also the outcome of your risk assessments under the Health and Safety Act. Remember here that if you're a critical wellbeing service, if you are using vaccine passes for clients, then your staff also do need to be vaccinated. And then if vaccine passes aren't being used, staff don't have to be vaccinated unless they're covered by a mandate, or if the social service as an employer, so if you as an employer have undertaken a risk assessment and that you've decided that vaccination of staff is required to meet your health and safety obligations. So I know that there are a few challenges emerging out there, and I just want to acknowledge them before I wrap up my kōrero this morning. Some of the things that we've been hearing about are that it has been for some providers challenging to scale up measures to meet the requirements of different traffic light settings. These changes have come relatively quickly for all of us. Also, we're hearing questions around how to safely provide services to unvaccinated people. Also, how to work through requiring vaccination as a result of a health and safety at work assessment that you've done as an organisation, as an employer. Working through issues when staff choose not to be vaccinated. We know that is really difficult terrain to navigate. And then I've also heard from some of our providers that there are questions around vaccination for caregivers, for example, foster carers in the Oranga Tamariki system. So I really want to put the question out there, are you experiencing other challenges, or do you have any part-time around this? Please share your questions in the chat and the MSD crew will be happy to answer them. And then finally, just to wrap up, really just want to say again, this is a changing time that we are going through. And if you're just doing the best you can and just getting through, then that is ka pai. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Ngā mihi nui kia koe e Claire, mo tō kōrero, very concise and dense, a lot of information in there, so thank you very much. It was clear as well, appreciate that. Also, whānau mā, I see there are 4 questions in the chat, and as Claire's mentioned, we will address those, some of them in our Q&A session, but because we've only got a reduced amount of time, we'll address them in an update later. But please keep those questions coming through. We're about to go into our next guest speaker. I realise that my internet is actually a bit choppy, so I'll stop talking very shortly, but I presumed that I'm sitting in my boss's chair because I thought he'd have the best internet in the building, but I'm chopping in and out, so I'll introduce our next speaker. So next up, we've got our General Manager of Pacific and Community Capability, Serena Curtis. So nau mai e hoa tō kōrero.
Kia ora koutou, ngā mihi mahana kia koutou, Serena Curtis, tōku ingoa, mō Ngaiterangi Nui me Ngāti Hāmoa hau. So I'm Serena Curtis. I have the pleasure of being the GM Pacific and Community Capability, which allows me to have a strong focus on our Pacific portfolio within MSD, but in the community capability space is probably where I'm going to touch most on in our kōrero today. So in the community capability space, you may have heard of these products before, and they are going to play quite a significant role in what the COVID protection framework looks like from an operational level. So we have the Community Connection Service, the Provider Capability and Resilience Fund, Community Capability and Resilience Fund, and just recently I have the pleasure of doing the food team. So what that allows us to do is a bit more coordination and collaboration around how that then effectively supports the response of the COVID protection framework. What it looks like in practice, so we've been spending quite a bit of time with our health colleagues recently in regards to what does that mean in ensuring that our whānau get access to the right services at the right time whilst they're self-isolating. For many of you will have been involved in the last 18 months as part of the response. And what we're transitioning to is elimination to protection. And as we're transitioning, we have to recognise that some of the infrastructure and some of the ways in which we were addressing elimination need to change to be able to live with COVID, as we say. So in terms of what the CPF, I'll just call it that for now, kind of looks like, is community locally led, regionally enabled, and nationally supported. Locally led, regionally enabled are quite significant components of this framework being successful, because we need to ensure the solutions are close to our whānau and not at a distance. The care and protection framework is about ensuring that we have the right services, collaborating, working together for our whānau to be able to access at the times in which they need. And I suppose last but not least, in terms of that kind of high level narrative, is there will be a range of us participating in that support for that whānau over the duration of their self-isolation period. We acknowledge that in certain documents they talk about 10 days, 14 days, but we also recognise that from experience for many whānau, that actually can be a very long period of time outside of those dates. Some whānau actually were self-isolating for over 48 days, which means for them, the support that they need is quite intensive and overwhelming, and hence the need to get the right people to support our whānau. The work with health has been valuable, and really what we're trying to do as we go forward is be very clear about who delivers health and who delivers welfare. In the past, we've had our colleagues at health do an amazing job in working with our partners, our providers in the community to do both. But because of scale and capacity and workforce fatigue and the need to increase our workforce, we need to be a bit more deliberate in terms of who does health and who does welfare. So the way in which we've tactically done this is when an assessment is done, there's an identified health need, there's an identified welfare need, and the welfare needs will be triaged to our social service providers who are actively involved in supporting those whānau. There's two ways in which you may be engaged. One is that our whānau have identified that you are their preferred provider, and they are who they want to work with. Sorry, you are who they want to work with, I should say. The other way in which you may be engaged is where at a regional level through the triage system, they have identified this whānau not being a part of the system and therefore need a provider to support them through their self-isolation period. I'm just going to go briefly into some of the packages, because many of you will have seen our minister announce a package recently in regards to supporting this framework. I do want to recognise that these decisions are being made at that regional level, so I'm not going to presume or preempt those decisions. But please note that we all need to be involved in supporting these whānau. We already have 7,000 whānau in self-isolation, and the numbers will grow. So collectively, we will all be a part of this at some stage in the journey. We have received additional funding for our community connection service, and they will be a primary resource in relation to supporting whānau in self-isolation. We've received additional funding around provider capability to support all providers in terms of any capacity and capability requirements that you might need to participate in this response space. We've got additional community capability funding that will allow us to look at things that are within the community setting that can contribute to these responses, and primarily focusing on community organisations receiving that funding. And then we have a huge amount of food funding, because we do know that for whānau, food has been the primary need in those initial 24 to 48 hours, and then other needs start to be disclosed over time. But food is essential in terms of keeping our whānau at home. And just to remind you that this model is about where possible, whānau can self-isolate at home, whereas in the past, whānau have had to be moved to MIQ facilities or other types of accommodation requirements. But the intent of this is to actually ensure they can safely self-isolate at home, which means that we have to ensure they get what they need to be able to stay home and not venture outside those doors for their own safety, but also the safety of others in the community. So again, food, we've got food funding. We also have funding for surge situations where there may be a rohi or a town or a city that has to be put into what we would normally have associated with level 4, but we'll now talk about the red light. And we've also got funding for any additional services that we might need to support as part of the overall response. So the COVID protection framework is new for some of us, but actually we've been working in this space for the last 18 months. And really what we're doing is we're recognising that it is going to become the new norm, and therefore how do we support and resource that new norm. And things will start to emerge over the coming weeks in regards to your participation, notwithstanding you will have already engaged with many of these whānau. You will be the ones they trust, and so it will not be a surprise if you are the preferred provider for them to carry out that support whilst they're in self-isolation. There'll be a lot of material that comes out over the next week or so to kind of give you a bit more clarity about what the expectations are in terms of the role of a provider that does support whānau in self-isolation. But first and foremost is your safety and ensuring that you're able to do that service safely, especially for your kaimahi. So I think I'll leave it at there, Waylon, if that's okay. And then I see there's quite a bit of chat. But just know that this approach is a shared approach. It's not an MSD approach, it's a welfare approach, that we are working in partnership with health, and that it is us collectively that will help these whānau get through those periods of time where they need to self-isolate.
Ana ngā mihi hoa mo tō kōrero. Again, very, very clear, and lots of information in there for us to, digest on, and want to mihi to your point about it. It is a collective effort, a collective wellbeing effort, and so there's a lot of players that we have to work through. And as you say, some of us have been working in this space for the last 18 months and some of us haven't. So there's a bit of learning, but we're doing it at pace. So ngā mihi hoa. Well, that brings us to the end of our webinar. Want to thank you all for your participation. Really want to thank Dr. Claire Ahmed for it, and Serena Curtis for their presentations today. Very, very helpful. And as I said, we're going to be putting this webinar online, and we'll let you know when that comes out as well. The community inbox that you registered to be part of this webinar, you can also, following today, if you have further questions, get in touch or send them through to that email address. As I said, we'll also be providing an e-update of all the pātai that came through, not only in our chat, but also some of the feedback and themes that were captured in the breakout sessions. Anyway, so ka mātua e tēnā whānau, au te akarakia, and then that's us. So, kia inoi tātou, unuhia, unuhia, unuhia ki tūru tapanui, kia wātea, kia māma, te ngākau, te tīnana, te wairua, te ara takata. Koe ara e runga whakaera ka ki runga kia teina. Uie, tae ki e.
Kia ora, Waylon. Thank you, everyone.
Ka pai, ka kite
Ora,
koutou.
ngā
Thank you.
Thank you.